The door slammed behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood on the stoop of our brownstone, my breath visible in the cold morning air, my hands trembling at my sides. The argument still rang in my ears, each word a shard of glass cutting deeper than the last. "It's not yours." Evelyn's voice, usually so soft, so warm, had been cold and sharp, like the edge of a knife. She hadn't even cried, not at first. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance, as if daring me to react. And I had. God, I had. I'd shouted, I'd thrown things. I locked myself in my office, waking up my lawyers and sending emails. I'd said words I couldn't take back, words that hung in the air between us like poison. And then she'd cried, and I'd hated myself for it. The street was quiet, the kind of calm that only comes in the early hours of a weekday, when the city is still shaking off the remnants of sleep. I glanced at my watch. 7:42 a.m. I was late. Again. But for the first time in years, I didn't care. My briefcase felt heavy in my hand, a symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed. And for what? A corner office with a view of a city that didn't give a damn about me. A wife who'd been sleeping with my cousin. A child who might not even be mine. I started walking, my feet carrying me toward the subway, my mind a whirlwind of anger and despair. The sidewalks were slick with rain, the puddles reflecting the gray sky above. I stepped in one without thinking, the water seeping into my shoe, cold and uncomfortable. I barely noticed. My thoughts were a jumble, fragments of the morning replaying on a loop. Evelyn's face, her voice, how she looked at me when I'd asked the question I already knew the answer to. Is she mine? The memory made me stop short, my chest tightening, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I leaned against a lamppost, my head spinning, my stomach churning. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to do anything to make the pain stop. But I couldn't. I was trapped, a prisoner of my own life. I stepped off the curb mindlessly, plodding on. A cab sped by, honking loudly, its tires splashing water onto my pants, snapping me out of my thoughts. I straightened as the onlookers gasped, wiping my face with the back of my hand, and kept walking. The subway entrance was just ahead, a beacon of routine in the chaos of my mind. I kept going and descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and stale urine, a familiar stench that usually made me wrinkle my nose in disgust. Today, I barely noticed. The platform was crowded, the usual mix of commuters, suits like me, students with their headphones on, construction workers in dusty boots. No one looked at me. No one ever did. I was just another face in the crowd, another cog in the machine. I found a spot near the platform's edge, my briefcase clutched tightly in my hand. The train would be here soon. I just had to hold it together until then. But the thoughts kept coming, unbidden and unwelcome. Evelyn's face, my cousin's smug grin, the baby, her baby, who might never call me daddy. I closed my eyes trying to block it out, but it was useless. The images were burned into my brain, seared there like a brand. The sound of the train approaching snapped me back to reality. I opened my eyes just as it roared into the station, its brakes screeching, its lights blinding. The crowd surged forward and I let myself be carried along, my body moving on autopilot. I stepped onto the train, my briefcase bumping against my leg, and found a seat near the middle. The doors closed and the train lurched forward, its rhythmic swaying almost soothing. Almost. I stared at my reflection in the window, my face pale and drawn, my eyes hollow. I looked like a ghost. The thought flickered at the edge of my mind, unsettling but fleeting, like a shadow I couldn't quite catch. I shook my head, trying to dispel the idea, but it clung to me, stubborn and insistent. The train continued swaying rhythmically, and the sound of the wheels on the tracks was a low, hypnotic hum. I leaned back in my seat, my briefcase resting heavily on my lap, and let out a long, shaky breath. The morning's argument played in my head on a loop, each word sharper than the last. Evelyn's voice, cold and cutting. My own, loud and desperate. The silence that followed, heavy and suffocating. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the images were relentless. Evelyn's face, her tears, the way she'd looked at me, like I was a stranger, like I was the one who'd betrayed her. The train jolted, and my eyes snapped open. I glanced around, my heart pounding for no reason I could name. The car was empty, completely empty, except for him. He sat across from me, his face shadowed beneath a tattered hood, his hands resting on his knees. His clothes were filthy, his boots caked with mud, and the smell, God, the smell, was like rotting garbage and damp earth. But it was his eyes that held me. They were too bright, too knowing, like he could see straight through me, straight into the mess of my life. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like the rumble of the train itself. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "What?" "You look like you've been through hell," he said, leaning forward. His breath smelled like mint, which was somehow more unsettling than the rest of him. "Want to talk about it?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "I'm fine." He chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "No, you're not. But that's okay. You're not supposed to be." The vagrant leaned back in his seat, his hood still casting shadows over his face, but his eyes glinted like shards of glass catching the light. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze piercing as if he were reading the pages of my life, like a book. I shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his stare making my skin crawl. "You ever think about your choices?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and gravelly, like the rumble of the train beneath us. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Choices," he repeated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Big ones, small ones, the ones that change everything, the ones you wish you could take back." I frowned, my mind immediately flickering to Evelyn, the fight, the life I'd built, or thought I'd built. "Everyone thinks about that," I said, my voice tight. "It's called regret." He chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "Regret. That's one word for it. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's the weight of it. The way it sits on your chest, heavy as a stone, until you can't breathe. Until you can't think about anything else." I stared at him, my throat dry. "Who are you?" He ignored the question, leaning forward again, his elbows resting on his knees. "Tell me something," he said, his tone almost casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "What's the one thing you've done that you're most ashamed of?" I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him it was none of his business, but the words caught in my throat. There was something about the way he looked at me, something that made it impossible to lie. I hesitated, my mind racing. I cheated on a test in high school. I told myself it didn't matter, that everyone did it, but I knew it was wrong. I just didn't care. He nodded slowly as if he'd expected that answer. "And?" And what? And what else? He pressed, his voice soft but insistent. That's not the one, is it? That's just the one you're willing to say out loud. I felt a chill run down my spine. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, he said, his lips curling into a faint smile. It's the one you keep buried, the one you don't even let yourself think about. The one that keeps you up at night, even when you pretend it doesn't. I looked away, my heart pounding. He was right, of course. There were things I'd done, things I'd said, that I couldn't bear to think about. The time I'd lied to my father about getting into Harvard, just to see the pride in his eyes. The deal I'd made at work, the one that cost 100 people their jobs, but earned me a 6-figure bonus. The way I'd looked at Evelyn sometimes like she was a problem to be solved, rather than the woman I loved. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because you need to, he said simply. Because you can't move forward until you face it. All of it. The train rattled on, the lights flickering overhead. I glanced at the windows, expecting to see the dark tunnels rushing past, but nothing happened. Just blackness, endless and impenetrable. Where are we? I asked, my voice trembling. Nowhere, he said, leaning back again. And everywhere. Depends on how you look at it. I stared at him, my mind racing. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his tattered coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He held it out to me, and I took it reluctantly, my fingers brushing against his. The photo was of a young boy, no more than 8 or 9, standing in front of a Christmas tree, a wide grin on his face. Who is this? I asked, my stomach twisting. You don't recognize him? The vagrant asked, his tone almost teasing. I shook my head, but even as I did, something about the boy's face felt familiar. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile. It was like looking at a reflection of someone I used to know. That's you, the vagrant said, his voice soft. Or who you used to be, before the world got its hands on you. I stared at the photo, my chest tightening. Where did you get this? Does it matter? He asked, tilting his head. What matters is what you see, what you feel. That boy, he had dreams, he had hope. What happened to him? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know. That boy felt like a stranger, someone I'd left behind long ago. The vagrant leaned forward again, his eyes boring into mine. You think you're lost, he said, his voice low and urgent. But you're not. You're just stuck. And until you face what's holding you back, you'll stay that way. The train began to slow, the lights growing brighter, until the entire car was bathed in a blinding white glow. I shielded my eyes, my heart racing. The air felt different, thinner, colder, as if the train had crossed some invisible threshold. Is this it? I asked, my voice trembling. Is this the end? The vagrant stood, his hood falling back to reveal a face that was both familiar and strange, like a memory I couldn't quite place. His eyes were no longer shadowed but bright, almost luminous, and his expression was one of quiet understanding. No, he said, his voice soft but firm. It's a beginning. The doors slid open, and warm and inviting light poured in. I stepped forward, my feet moving naturally, but before I crossed the threshold, I turned back. Who are you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, and for a moment I saw myself in his eyes, not as I was, but as I could have been. The boy in the photograph, The man I might have become if I'd made different choices, if I'd been braver, kinder, truer to myself. "You know who I am," he said. "I'm the part of you that never gave up, the part that still believes in second chances." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "But I don't understand. What happens now?" "That's up to you," he said, his voice fading as the light grew brighter. "You've carried the weight long enough. It's time to let it go." I stepped into the light, and for a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no sensation, no thought. Just a vast, endless white. And then, slowly, the world came back into focus. The headlines called it a tragedy. A successful investment banker struck down in his prime by a reckless taxi driver. The obituaries praised my career, my philanthropy, my dedication to my family. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the train, the vagrant, the light. Evelyn didn't get a cent. Yes, she was far from perfect, but I can't say I treated her the way she deserved. Not in life, and certainly not in death. My soul will carry the weight of what I've learned, not as a burden, but as a reminder to be kinder, listen more, have integrity, and love without conditions. If there is a next time, I hope to be the man I always thought I was, but never quite became. Yet the trust for Evelyn's daughter, my daughter, no matter what the DNA said, would ensure she'd never want for anything. As for my cousin, he disappeared, leaving Evelyn to return to her mother in shame. But let this be a warning to you, a small one, whispered in the dark, where the shadows grow long and the air grows cold. Think carefully about the choices you make, because sometimes, when the subway rattles through the tunnels beneath Manhattan, you might see him, the vagrant, sitting in the corner of the car, his eyes bright and knowing. He's still out there offering second chances to lost souls like you, lost souls like me. You might think he is a figment of your imagination, but if you ever see him, there is a good chance he is there for you.